whole human race instead of half the human race involved, but you have a different kind of energy involved, a different kind of mentality. And there's a very nice book called Maternal Thinking by Hannah. Somebody, I have a lot of Hannahs going through my head, and I'm not coming up with the right one. It'll come back to me. But Maternal Thinking, and now that we've got Google, you don't need to remember author or publisher or any of that stuff. She's very good on exactly what that mentality is. But it also brings up the point that, I think this is really fundamental, that when you decide to use nonviolence, you often find yourself fixing things that you didn't even set out to address. You didn't even maybe realize that they were a problem. Okay? So what's going on in this case? The women are joining the movement. Why? Because most of the men are in jail, because they're more easily picked off when there's a demonstration. And what they want is they want to liberate Palestine. But they don't realize that they're liberating it socially as well by bringing women into a more humane situation in that society. I really, really like this point. I hope you're enjoying it also. I think that once you make that one right decision, and you might think it's just a question of means, and if it's only a strategic question of means, it won't have this effect. But once you gravitate towards this notion, this feeling that nonviolence is going to be the way you want to be as a human being, remember it's Philippine style, we do it because we're Polish, all of that stuff. Once you start doing that, you may or may not get what you're trying to get, but you're going to get some other stuff that you didn't even think about along the way. You may get what you're trying to get, but you will also tend to be working on, here, let's put it this way. Once you decide that you're going to use nonviolence, you'll find that you're working on many different manifestations of violence simultaneously. It's good to just be consciously aware of that. Okay. The next thing I want to cite is just a little bit further on in that page, the paragraph 3, says 57.3. I realize that this is a little bit tedious, but I'm hoping that it's going to help you go through the readings and pull out stuff like this. The roots of the organization of the Intifada can be traced directly to the creation and expansion of grassroots committees since the mid-1970s. Okay? And we saw this with the base communities in the Philippines, and this also existed throughout Central America, throughout Latin America. And I'm going to kind of hint that this might be an answer to one of the problems that we were discussing, what happens when the leadership is untrustworthy, gets pulled off base by threats and so forth. That I am not one who thinks that everything has to come from the grassroots and there should be no organizational structure at all. There should be no room for people with specific kinds of expertise. I'm not saying that, but this was an extreme that people sometimes drifted into, particularly in Germany, Germany and Spain, where there had been rather serious problems with authoritarianism. People tended to go in the other direction and say we don't have no authority whatsoever. This is all going to come from Basisdemokratie, democracy from the bottom. So while at the one hand I'm not saying we should go to that extreme, I think that for durability, it has almost always been the case that small grassroots communities, we're talking about grassroots committees in Palestine, base communities throughout basically the Christian parts of the global south, really, and what would be the equivalent in our own dearly beloved student peace movement of today? When you go out to, let's say somebody says, let's go up to Seattle and overthrow globalism, what do people do in terms of association? Yeah. Well, it could be within universities or it could be not. But here's what I'm getting. When you get there on the ground, okay, Seattle is a very dramatic case of this because I'm not sure of the numbers. There's something like 50,000 people turned up there. Now that's more people that are Pax majors on UC Berkeley, so you know that not all of them were UC Berkeley Pax majors. So when you get there, you have a few very charismatic individuals like Medea Benjamin from Global Exchange and others, but they don't want to take a role of leadership. So what do people do? Who's going to tell 50,000 people who's going to go where and do what? What did they start? Right, what kind of group did you say? Affinity group, right, exactly. That's our equivalent. So that's our version of these micro-communities that are pulled together for a particular purpose in an emergency, but it turns out to be a very effective and very efficient way of organizing people without going into a hierarchical pyramid. Yeah. So call it what you will, and in the base communities, which incidentally have now been imitated, and I don't think they'd be angry at me for saying that, they're being imitated by Buddhists. So you have Buddhist-based communities. There are 4,200 people taking part in something like, I forget how many Buddhist-based communities now, studying nonviolence, hopefully buying my book. And actually Meta is working with them. So, okay, that's very helpful in organization. Now, we talked about the stone throwing and how it has two different ways of being interpreted, either defiance or an actual attempt to hurt, and it's a gray area. Over time, overt demonstrations and stone throwing confrontations gradually receded in the occupied territories. So if you just read that one sentence, you might think, uh-oh, they're winding down. They don't have Shabab throwing stones and they don't have demonstrations, and the movement is disappearing. But, hang on, one more sentence now. This did not, however, signal an end to the uprising, and restructuring within the Palestinian community proceeded behind the scenes. What do we want to call that? What's my favorite term that I keep using ad infinitum ad nauseam over and over again? Starts with a C. Constructive program, thank you, yeah. So this was the beginning of constructive program for the Palestinian Intifada. Now on page 59, paragraph 3. The Intifada proved to be a double-edged sword, strengthening and transforming the Palestinian community in the service of the national cause, which was to some extent outweighed by the degree of violence and repression to which Palestinians were subjected. As the Intifada wore on, this population became increasingly weary and demoralized. We talked about that a little bit on Tuesday, and here's a part that we didn't talk about on Tuesday. Weary and demoralized and anxiously awaited some measure of hope from abroad. Okay, so we're getting into a balance thing again, where there's a right way and a wrong way to bring in interventions from outside the community. And we've been talking earlier on today about the right way, how bringing Hildegard Gosmeier came in there as a Catholic so she could relate directly to one of the communities on the ground, and all the wonderful stuff that she was able to bring in. And basically, in realistic terms, it's almost impossible for an insurrection to survive without that kind of thing today. We're working on different ways of getting the information out, but so far, movements that have been ignored have not succeeded. But on the other hand, yeah, Matthias? Well, in the first Intifada, here's why I'm hesitating. I'm hesitating because I don't know whether to call Mubarak Awad outsider or not. He's born in Palestine, educated in the U.S. Goes back, you know, with a PhD in psychology from here. So he's like a perfect example, really. He's indigenous, but he has access to outside support. But beyond Mubarak, I think in the first Intifada, no. And it's interesting that now this present Intifada has much more outside support through groups like the International Solidarity Movement and so forth. However, darn it, they're not as committed to nonviolence as the first Intifada was. So it's very frustrating. You see a lot of these examples of people getting it partly right. I have this piece right, but that piece wrong. And that's where we really need some kind of strategic overview. So with that qualification, I would say basically no, the Palestinian Intifada not only didn't have international community support, well, no, wait, I'm sorry. By virtue of the fact that they were nonviolent, they started to get a lot more appreciation, and they started to change the image of what the Islamic world is like in the international community, and that did lead to Madrid and the Oslo Accords. Yeah.
When I read about the first Intifada, I get there was a lot of nonviolence, but
Yeah.
I also remember I was probably 14, 15 at that time, and
Uh-huh.
everything I saw on the news was
Yeah.
throwing stones and,
Yep.
and you know, slowly shooting
Yep.
tear gas into the crowds and
Yep.
more shooting. So I have it in my visual memory, I have
Yeah.
that as violence.
Well, unfortunately, Matthias, most people have it in their mind as a violent uprising, and it's because of this extreme disservice that's provided by the media. Now, just now in Memphis, Tennessee, of all places, I mean, I associate Memphis, Tennessee with very good forms of music, but they had a conference on media reform, which was attended by several thousand people, and I think we're beginning to realize. See, when Allende was overthrown in 1973, there was a journalist in Chile by the name of Ariel Dorfman who asked himself what went wrong. He said Allende was doing all this wonderful stuff. He had nationalized this industry, nationalized that industry, but he failed to nationalize one key industry, and that was communications. So through that, it was relatively easy to turn the population against him. Well, you know, they crushed the economy. Nixon's famous expression, we're going to make the economy scream, started there. And then when they were weakened, pretty easy to turn them against Allende. And you saw the ecstatic cheering of the crowd for Pinochet because he had brought back a little bit of economic stability. So we're starting to learn how critical this is. And I think that might make a lot of difference. In fact, this is one of the main things I'm working on is, you know, mass media culture and what we can possibly do about it, because I think without fixing that, no solution is going to be very permanent. Okay. I would actually like to stop myself at this point, if this is okay with you, RB. Would you be willing to come up here and describe what you've been doing? This is going to take a certain amount of nonviolent courage on RB's part. I got incidentally about 1/5 of the way into the material. I wanted to cover what I found it useful. Perhaps I'll turn my frustration. I tried that once. Don't look at it. I'll turn sorry. No, I want you to be on record.
Okay, I think I'm good to go. I'm RB. I'm also a little congested right now, so bear with me. I'm part of the Armenian Student Association, and one of the major events we promote is the United Hands Across Cal. That's basically when we try to get everyone together to promote the end of violence and genocide today, and also to focus on the recognition of the Armenian genocide, which occurred in 1950.
Can I just interject one thing? Hitler said when he started launching the genocide against the Jews, he said, "Who even talks about the Armenian genocide anymore?" So that was one of his main excuses to do that.
Yeah, that's one of the things we bring up. Like he said, like who today speaks of the annihilation of the Armenians. So it shows that if we don't recognize genocides of the past, it's just a cycle that's going to continue today. So what I was trying to do actually was I wanted to get the Armenian community and the Turkish community to have some kind of dialogue, not dialogue, more of a peace together in Berkeley, rather than continuing this animosity. Because like we're talking about, violence is only going to get more violence. So I figured this would be one way to do it. But when I brought it up to the Armenian Student Association exec board that I'm part of, it was met with a lot of opposition. Because like if I bring it up, the first thing that comes up is no, you know, there's too much going on. You know, they won't believe it. You know, it was really bad. But like when I talked to them, I kind of convinced a little bit of them. It's just thing I want to emphasize was how many questions are brought up from it. Like, do I try to get the Turkish community involved in this the UHAC, United Hands Across Cal, is that the right event? How do I go about talking to the Turkish community, and how do I go about convincing the Armenian community that this is the way to go? Because like we're saying, if there's a couple people, let's say in the Armenian community or the Turkish community, who are really against this idea, that's going to stand out in whatever I'm trying to do, you know? Besides that, one idea we brought up was to try to get the early adopters involved rather than just trying to go all or nothing towards the Turkish community. And when I say early adopters, it's kind of like like Turkish individuals who are ready to take the next step towards peace, you know? And we don't have to do much in the realm of like convincing them that this is a really good idea, you know? And maybe in a couple years, you know, get the peace going, see how that works out. I think there's one thing. Go ahead.
This is really interesting because I met international, and a few Turkish people actually approached me last night to see if they said that they were organizing an Armenian and Turkish
Dialogue.
that we're going to host at our house. I think
It's March 10th, yeah.
March.
So,
Is that the same?
it's on the same idea. I think with that, it's basically a dialogue between Armenian and people from the Armenian and Turkish community here in the Bay Area, and it's basically just so we could start talking again, you know, because like especially in like the people I've talked that live in Turkey, you're not allowed to talk about this issue, you know. So I think that's really important to get the dialogue out. And that's about it, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. So I'm not going to go through the shirt button ritual again. This, when RB and I were talking about this morning, he brought up a number of points I think are useful for us. One is this question of early adopters. If you ever read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, you look out there and it's this monolithic world of like 140 million people watching the Super Bowl, and it looks like there isn't anybody out there who's going to listen to us, and you can sometimes get very demoralized thinking about trying to persuade everybody at once. But you don't have to persuade everybody at once. It never works that way. You find people who are going to pick up the idea, and they will have a better chance of persuading their own networks and people in their own community than you would. See, if RB, as an Armenian, goes into the Turkish community and says, you know, come on board with me, there's a suspicion right away. But if he gets a few Turkish individuals within their community carrying that ball for him, then that's right. So it's a little bit like the great chain of nonviolence. Yeah, yeah.
One more thing you want me to bring up
Yeah.
is how am I supposed to continue this nonviolent or try to get this
Yeah.
nonviolent movement going without increasing Armenian participation in the event?
Yes, we came to a very difficult point. I think I remember this very well now, Arby. I was about 1/3 of the way through my latte when this happened. There comes a point where you're faced with a choice of making a compromise so you can keep the entire Armenian community intact, or going with the people who are on board with you, regardless of whether they're Armenian, Turkish, or they happen to live in an international house or whatever. And in this globalizing world of ours, this is becoming an increasingly interesting question that whom do we really belong to? Who is our community? And I think we'll end up discovering that we belong to many intersecting communities. And it's a difficult choice to make, but it may just have to be the case that you're going to have to go forward without having the entire Armenian community at your disposal or on board with you. Now, this brings up an organizational form that the Quakers developed, which was very handy. We're all familiar with the term consensus, but it was quite articulate the way the Quakers developed it. You spend a lot of time trying to get everybody on board with one issue, and you're able to identify 3 positions. Okay, Arby, I think this is terrific. Now that you've opened my eyes, this is going to be not just for the Armenian community, but for the whole world. We're going to serve Armenians by serving others. I get it. Then there'll be a group that says, I don't get it, but I don't see anything wrong with it. I'm not going to stop you. And then there's going to be a group that says, you bring one Turk in here and I'm out here. And so these positions are identified recognizably, and the second is called, first is the consensus, and then there's the, I'm forgetting the terminology, something like abstention. I'm not going along with you, but I'm not going to block you. And then there's blocking. So as this thing is going on, we're inventing new organizational forms, new methods of democracy that have only been around since the 17th century, and so forth. Okay, well, that's our time for today. On Tuesday, we're coming into the 21st century with a documentary called Bringing Down a Dictator on the overthrow of Slobodan Milosevic. And again, I think that's kind of long, so try and get here early, and I hope we'll have the other back door fixed by then.